My wife was harassing me behind my back when I didn't hear it, but one day everything changed. My name is Clark, and up until this past winter, I believed I was living a relatively peaceful life. I'm 32, a project coordinator for a logistics firm, and until recently, I was married to a woman named Lenora, who's 29. We had been together for 5 years, married for 4, and during that time, I genuinely believed we were a solid team. Or, at least, that's what I told myself. It was Christmas morning when everything started to unravel, though in truth, the foundation had been cracking long before that. We had Lenora's family staying with us for the holidays. Her parents were in the downstairs guest room, and her younger sister, Greta, was staying in the office upstairs. The plan was simple: open presents together, have brunch, watch old movies, and enjoy the sort of warm, slow day that makes winter feel like a soft blanket rather than a cage. I'd woken early to start the coffee, a little tradition of mine. I always loved being the first one up, the quiet of the house before everyone else stirred. It gave me time to breathe, to think, to feel grateful. That morning, I was especially eager. I'd spent weeks planning the perfect gifts for Lenora, some jewelry she'd admired but never bought, a limited edition skincare set from a brand she followed religiously, and a pair of wireless earbuds she'd casually mentioned back in October. I'd been careful with our budget, cutting corners where I could, quietly skipping a few things for myself so she could have more. Around 7:15, I decided to take a cup of coffee up to Greta just to see if she wanted to join me before the rest of the house woke up. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard my name. Clark is so predictable, Lenora said, her voice low but clearly amused. Every single year he gets all giddy about gift giving like it's some sort of grand gesture. And the best part? Every gift I give him is paid for with his own card. He never even notices. I froze. My foot paused mid-step. The door to the office wasn't fully closed. Greta laughed. Wait, seriously? You use his card? Every time, Lenora said, a soft chuckle escaping. He's like a well-trained golden retriever. Just happy to please. Honestly, it's kind of adorable, if you ignore how clueless it is. They both laughed again. I stood there in silence. At first, I thought maybe I misheard. Maybe it was some inside joke or exaggeration. But the laughter, the tone, the ease in her voice, there was no misunderstanding it. It wasn't a one-off comment. It was a conversation. A comfortable one. One they'd had before, probably. I turned around, walked back down the stairs, and sat on the living room couch. The coffee I'd brewed had gone cold in my hand. I stared at the Christmas tree, lights blinking softly, and I waited. Waited until everyone came downstairs. Waited as Lenora kissed me on the cheek and handed me a neatly wrapped box. Waited as Greta smiled across the room like nothing had happened. I played my part. I opened the gifts. A new watch. A gaming controller I'd mentioned in passing. A pair of boots I'd been eyeing online. I smiled. I said thank you. I kissed Lenora's forehead and told her she was thoughtful. I didn't tell her that I now knew I'd paid for every single one of those things. For the next few days, I went through the motions. I cleaned up after the guests, helped Lenora with cooking, smiled through the video calls with extended family. But something had shifted inside me. Something subtle but immovable. A part of me had gone silent, not in defeat, but in deep observation. After her family left on the 27th, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened up all our financial accounts. I'd always trusted Lenora with the day-to-day budgeting. She was better at managing bills, she'd said, and I hadn't seen any reason to question that. We both worked full-time, we lived comfortably, and we didn't seem to argue much about money. But that morning, I saw everything for what it was. There were cash withdrawals I didn't recognize. Store credit cards I had no memory of opening. Beauty subscriptions. Spa days. High-end lunches. Charges labeled as groceries or household that were clearly not either. And I wasn't angry, not yet. I was methodical. I took screenshots. Saved PDF copies of the statements. Created folders. Labeled everything. That afternoon, Lenora was sitting at the kitchen counter, humming as she scrolled through her phone. I think we should wait another year on the bathroom remodel, she said casually, not looking up. I know you wanted to do it this spring, but things are just a bit tight right now. I nodded. Yeah, maybe you're right. She smiled, relieved I hadn't pressed. And that's when I understood something else she had no idea I knew. Over the next several days, I played my part to perfection. I went back to work, pretended things were normal, kissed her goodbye in the mornings, texted her during lunch, and complimented her cooking in the evenings. But at night, when she went to bed early with her latest audiobook playing in her earbuds, I stayed up. I was learning, documenting, preparing. The deeper I dug, the more I realized it wasn't just holiday spending or birthday gifts. It was patterns. Years of purchases. Small lies that added up to something else. There were transfers from our joint savings account to accounts in her name. I even found a monthly $150 transfer labeled GW support that had been going to Greta for over a year. Why? I didn't know yet. But I knew it wasn't random. By the time New Year's Eve came around, I had a plan forming. We went to a party hosted by some friends from Lenora's book club. She spent most of the evening talking to her friends, barely acknowledging me except to ask for the car keys when she needed her sweater from the trunk. When we got home, she said she had a headache and went straight to bed. 15 minutes later, I heard her laughing from the bedroom. The headache had vanished. Her voice was light and playful, probably texting Greta. I sat in the dark living room with a legal pad and a pen, and I started writing down everything I knew. Everything I needed to do. Every account to separate. Every document to collect. Every step that would lead me out of the life I had unknowingly been trapped in. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. And I wanted freedom. The first Monday of January, I returned to work with a strange sense of steadiness. On the outside, nothing had changed. I wore the same gray jacket I always did, drank the same week office coffee, sat through the same Monday check-in with my team. But inside? I was moving pieces across a mental chessboard. I wasn't angry, not in the way people usually mean. My coworkers couldn't tell anything was wrong. That's how calm I felt, eerily so. I had stopped trying to understand why Lenora and Greta had talked about me that way. I stopped asking myself how long it had been going on. I just worked. That evening, after dinner, I told Lenora I had a project that would keep me busy for a few weeks. She barely looked up from her phone. Okay, well, just don't stay up too late again. You're always groggy in the mornings when you do. I nodded, kissed her forehead, and went to the study, if you could call it that. It was just a small space between the guest room and the linen closet. I opened my laptop and created new passwords for all my personal accounts. Set up two-factor authentication. Switched my phone plan to my name alone and ordered a new SIM card. Opened a new checking account with a credit union across town and rerouted my direct deposit. For the first time in years, I felt like I was reclaiming small things I had given away without realizing. Privacy. Boundaries. Control over my own name. Over the next week, I made small but intentional changes in my behavior. I stopped asking Lenora if she needed anything when I stopped at the store. I did only my laundry, not both of ours. I started eating at my desk during lunch and stopped texting her little updates about my day. These were things she'd once called sweet. But now, I saw how they'd been taken for granted. I still said I love you. Still kissed her goodnight. But the difference was, I was no longer trying to earn anything by doing it. I was simply biding time. Around the fourth day, Lenora asked if something was wrong. I smiled, shook my head, and said work was overwhelming. She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to scrolling through a post about kitchen backsplashes. That Friday, I met up with an old friend, Jasper, someone I hadn't seen much of in the past few years. Lenora never disliked him, exactly, but she always referred to him as your friend from before in that tone that meant someone who doesn't fit in with the life I built for us. We met at a quiet bar near the old train depot. We talked about work, life, and eventually, I told him most of the truth. Not all, but enough. He sat back, let out a low whistle, and said, you know, I always wondered. You used to light up when you talked about your relationship. Then somewhere in the past couple years, it turned into polite check-ins. Like a business partnership. He wasn't wrong. Jasper gave me the number of a divorce attorney he knew, someone named Wendell Case, who handled financial disputes and asset recovery. I didn't call Wendell right away. But the next night, I looked him up and read through his entire website. Every testimonial, every practice area, every downloadable PDF. By Sunday evening, I'd scheduled a consultation. And by Monday afternoon, I'd taken 2 hours of personal time to meet with Mr. Case in a small, quiet office across from a city library. He listened as I laid out everything. I showed him spreadsheets I'd made, folders of bank statement screenshots, even a recording I'd taken the night I overheard Lenora and Greta talking again, casually joking about how well-trained Clark is while sipping tea in the kitchen. Wendell didn't smile or frown. He simply nodded, asked if my state allowed single-party audio recording, it did, and said, we can work with this. When I got home that night, Lenora greeted me at the door with takeout from my favorite Thai place. She handed it to me with a bright smile and said, surprise. Thought you could use something comforting. I looked at the receipt tucked inside the paper bag. My own card had paid for it. Thanks, I said. I meant it in a way she didn't understand. That night, I didn't open my laptop. I just sat on the back porch, eating quietly, watching the frost gather on the edges of the patio table. It was strange, peaceful, even. Like the silence was finally mine. The next few days were spent organizing. I made digital copies of all essential documents, my birth certificate, passport, degree certificates, car title, and uploaded them to an encrypted drive. I went through every drawer in the house and pulled out the things I'd brought into the marriage, a collection of books I'd had since college, an old camera, a few family heirlooms. I started packing, subtly. I put a small suitcase in the back of my car with a few changes of clothes, toiletries, and my laptop. On Thursday, Lenora mentioned that she and Greta were planning a weekend together, some kind of girls' retreat with spa vouchers and wine tastings. She said it like she was doing me a favor, giving me the house to myself. Great, I said, and meant it. Friday morning, she kissed me goodbye and said, "Don't work too hard. Maybe invite Jasper over or something?" I smiled. Good idea. As soon as her car turned the corner, I made 3 phone calls. First, to the moving company I had scheduled the previous week. They arrived at 10 a.m. sharp. Second, to the property manager of the small apartment I'd quietly leased under my name 2 weeks earlier. Third, to Mr. Case, to let him know it was time. By 2 p.m., my belongings were boxed, loaded, and in transit. I left behind anything Lenora had brought into the marriage, her decor, her vanity, her desk, her plants. I even left half the kitchenware. Anything we bought together that I couldn't prove I'd paid for solo? I left it. I wasn't interested in disputes. I just wanted clean lines. Back at the house, I set the dining room table with care. On it, I placed printed statements showing where her gifts to me had been bought with my card. Records of the monthly transfers to Greta. Screenshots of the messages between them where they laughed about me, the audio file burned onto a USB drive, labeled clearly divorce papers, signed and ready, from Mr. Case's office. I placed my house key and wedding ring beside them. Finally, I left a note. Just one sentence. The man you underestimated has quietly exited the stage. Then, I walked out the front door, closed it behind me, and drove to my new apartment. It was small. Just 1 bedroom and a kitchen with no dishwasher. The living room had only an air mattress and a folding chair. But it was mine. I ordered a pizza. Opened a cold bottle of seltzer. Pulled my laptop onto my lap and waited. At 8:11 p.m., my phone began to buzz. Unknown number. Then another. Then a message. She's yelling. Please pick up. Greta. I turned off my phone. Then, for the first time in a long time, I exhaled. That night in the new apartment, the silence was different. Not empty. Not cold. It was the silence of a reset. No ambient TV noise playing in another room, no audio of Lenora's crime podcasts whispering through a door cracked open. Just the hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing outside. I slept poorly. Not from regret, more like my body still hadn't caught up to the decision my mind had already made. I woke up at 3:14 a.m., heart beating faster than usual, the ceiling unfamiliar in the dark. For a few minutes, I almost picked up my phone. Almost checked the messages I knew would be there. Then I rolled over and told myself what I had known for weeks: I had already said everything I needed to say. Through actions. Through preparation. Through walking out without a storm. When the sun rose, I pulled open the blinds to let the light in. I made coffee in the new kitchen, still half in boxes, still smelling like packing tape. I checked my email instead of my texts. Dozens of new messages. The first few were from Greta, sent around midnight. Please, Clark. You scared her. This is too much. Then, around 1:45 a.m. She's not eating. She's crying. She said she didn't mean anything. It was just a joke. Please just talk to her. And finally, at 3:09 a.m. Where did you take everything? At least tell me where the important stuff is. She called your work, they said you took time off. Are you leaving the country or something? That one made me laugh. No, I wasn't running away. I just knew better than to try to work through the chaos. I had 5 unused vacation days banked. I'd always planned on using them for a trip to the mountains. Funny how life changes your destination. By mid-morning, I made the only reply I would send to Greta. You both laughed about me like I was nothing. You said I was trained. This is what it looks like when someone stops obeying. She replied instantly with a string of messages, apologies, justifications, mixed tones of guilt and defensiveness. I didn't respond. I blocked her number the way I had blocked Lenora's. But I left other lines open, just in case someone needed to reach me for something truly urgent. I wasn't trying to disappear. I just didn't owe conversation. Around lunchtime, I drove to a nearby park with a sandwich and a thermos of tea. I sat on a bench by the lake and watched as a group of kids fed breadcrumbs to ducks. The sky was overcast, but the air was calm. That's when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Clark? It was Greta. How did you? Borrowed a coworker's phone. I had to. She's not okay. There was a pause, the kind that tries to pull sympathy from silence. She hasn't eaten. She hasn't left the house. She's barely speaking. Please, she regrets it. I took a breath. Not out of empathy. Out of composure. She had years to treat me like I mattered. Not just weeks or days. Years. I know, Greta said quickly. I didn't realize it would go this far. Greta, you laughed. That morning, when you thought I was asleep, you laughed. I heard it all. She didn't reply right away. Then, softly, she said, I'm sorry. I'm not the one who needs that apology. Can you just tell me where you put her things? She's panicking. I didn't take her things. I took mine. And that was the truth. I left the plants, the books, the vanity, even the tea mug she liked. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I was trying to leave with what was mine and no more. Before Greta could say anything else, I added, she'll be hearing from my attorney soon. That's how we'll talk from now on. And I hung up. That afternoon, I went to the gym for the first time in nearly a year. I did a light routine. Nothing fancy. Just a treadmill, some stretches, and 10 minutes on a rowing machine. I wasn't trying to become someone new. I was just reclaiming the version of me that used to exist before everything became about keeping someone else happy. That night, the messages shifted to social media. Lenora had posted a vague, emotional status. Some people disappear when you need them most. Some people were never really who you thought they were. The comments were full of sympathy. You deserve so much better. If he can't handle you at your worst. Hope you're okay, girl. Some of those names were mutual friends. People I hadn't heard from in months, some I had even helped move houses, fix their computers, donate to their fundraisers. Only 2 of them reached out to me directly. The first was Eli, a guy I used to work with. He messaged. Hey, saw Lenora's post. I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but if you ever want to talk, I'm around. The second was Melanie, an old college friend we'd both kept in touch with. She sent. I always thought you were the quiet one in that relationship. Hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you want someone to talk to who isn't part of the whole circus. I replied to both with a simple thank you. Nothing more. By the 3rd day, Lenora's mother had called. Her voicemail was scathing. I don't know what kind of man walks out without even a conversation. Do you think marriage is just something you walk away from when it gets hard? Shame on you, Clark. Shame. I didn't respond. Her father's message was softer. Hesitant. He said he didn't know what had happened, but hoped we could get back to a healthy place. There was no healthy place left. Only unlearning. Later that day, I forwarded everything to Mr. Case: emails, screenshots, bank logs. He responded quickly. We'll begin the filing tomorrow. The strength of your documentation will make this a clean process. I didn't smile at that. There was nothing joyful about it. But I did feel lighter. The hardest part wasn't walking away. It was staying quiet when every instinct wanted to shout. This is why. This is how it happened. This is what it cost me to stay quiet all these years. But I didn't shout. Not on social media. Not in emails. Not in conversations with those who only asked to get gossip, not truth. I just kept breathing. Kept going to work. Kept unpacking one box at a time. I learned how to cook a new dish, lentil stew. Burned it the first time. Got it right the second. I met Jasper for coffee. I called Eli to catch up. I replied to Melanie's message and we talked about books like we were 22 again. Each of those things wasn't a grand transformation. But each was a step toward living without being looked at like a tool someone had mastered. 3 weeks after I left, the official meeting was scheduled. A quiet room in a neutral legal office. Cream-colored walls, a window with filtered light, a long table set between two attorneys and two people who used to promise forever. Lenora sat across from me. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, messier than usual. She wore a light gray sweater I'd bought her 2 winters ago. Her fingers fidgeted with the sleeves, tugging at the thread. She looked up at me only once, when I entered the room. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't speak. The attorneys exchanged paperwork and greetings. Mr. Case handled the conversation with his usual measured calm. He presented our side with care, detailing asset separation, the clean division of joint savings, the proof that I'd taken only what I could show was mine. Lenora's lawyer listened, nodded occasionally, then began with a counterproposal. She wanted to keep the house. She wanted me to take on half of the remaining credit card debt. She wanted continued support until she could rebuild her life. I didn't flinch. Mr. Case simply opened a slim folder and slid it across the table. Inside were all the documents. Transaction records. Screenshots of financial transfers. Receipts for every gift she claimed had come from her. Evidence of her withdrawals. Notes showing months, even years, of financial choices that I hadn't been included in. And of course, the audio clip. The one that began with laughter and ended with, "He's like a trained dog." It's honestly hilarious. I didn't look at her while they listened. I looked out the window, watching the wind rustle through a tree just starting to bud. Early spring. New growth. When the audio ended, the room was quiet for a moment too long. Her lawyer's demeanor shifted. He glanced at her, then quietly asked for a moment alone with his client. They stepped into the hallway. Mr. Case leaned toward me and said softly, "They'll either concede or try to save face. But this is your moment. You've done everything right." And I had. When they returned, the requests had softened. No house. No ongoing support. A willingness to sell and split proceeds evenly. The debt was hers. She wouldn't contest anything else. I nodded. So did Mr. Case. And like that, the shape of our divorce became official. Lenora looked at me one more time before we left. "I never thought you'd leave like that," she whispered. I answered truthfully. "I never thought you'd treat me like that." Her eyes welled again, but she didn't argue. We left the building in silence. In the parking lot, she called my name. I turned around. "I'm getting help," she said, voice trembling. "Therapy. I know I've been cruel. I know I hurt you." I looked at her then, not with resentment, but with something closer to sorrow. "I hope you do the work," I said. "Not for me. For you." She stepped closer. "Is there any chance we could, someday, talk again? Even just as friends?" I shook my head gently. "I need a future that doesn't include apologies for things I didn't deserve in the first place." She nodded. Tears on her cheek now. She didn't try to hug me. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching me walk away. That was the last time I saw her in person. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. It moved quickly, clean paperwork, no children, no shared business or pension. Just assets, receipts, and a story that no longer had to be explained. I signed the final documents at Mr. Case's office. It took 15 minutes. There was no ceremony to it. Just quiet agreement and a firm handshake. Afterwards, I drove to a small bookstore downtown. One of the few places left that smelled like real paper. I bought myself a novel I'd once meant to read but never had time for. Then I walked across the street, sat on a park bench, and started page 1. It felt like the most ordinary thing in the world. And it was beautiful. 6 months have passed since I walked out of that house. My apartment is still small, but no longer half-packed. There are photos on the walls now, my own, from road trips I took in college. My friend Jasper comes by twice a month to cook and talk about work. I joined a weekend hiking group. I even went to a cooking class. Turns out, I'm not terrible at it. I made lentil stew again last week. It tasted like comfort and closure. I've been slowly reconnecting with the parts of myself I let go of while trying to maintain a relationship that didn't value me. Not because I was weak, but because I was trying to build something with someone who never saw the foundation the same way I did. Lenora? From what I've heard through mutual contacts, she's still living in the house, for now. With Greta. Apparently, that situation is tense. Their closeness didn't hold up well under shared financial stress. I try not to keep track. Not out of cruelty, but because I've realized that healing means no longer needing updates. A few weeks ago, I received a friend request from Lenora on a photo sharing app. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, a message came from an unknown number. I miss you. I've changed. I wish I could show you. I didn't reply. There was no anger. Just quiet certainty. That chapter is closed. That book is shelved. That life belonged to someone who kept offering love, even when it was being quietly taken for granted. Now, I live without needing to prove my worth through sacrifice. Now, I love myself enough to protect my peace. Now, the man once compared to a trained dog has learned to run free. Thank you all for watching the video, and see you soon.